Was sorry. Wassail is the drink that one imbibes while celebrating wassailing, which is an old tradition that involves drinking, singing, and fruit orchards. And on the slide, you can see a traditional wassail recipe. This is from the 15th century. So you can see there's a lot of interesting spices in there. And then on the right here, this is what wassailing is. It was and still is a 12th night tradition that is practiced throughout Britain in areas where fruit orchards, particularly apples and pears, are part of the agricultural landscape. The celebration actually has roots in paganism, a custom that where they would visit orchards and sing songs to the trees and the spirits in the hope of ensuring a good harvest the following season. And during the visit, a communal wassail bowl was filled with warm spiced cider, perry, which is a pear wine, or ale, and that would be shared amongst the revelers. So on the right-hand side on the picture, this little pail was probably their wassail bowl, because they probably weren't that wealthy. Moving on. Historically, wassailing took on many different forms depending on local tradition. Revelers typically visited local orchards and fruit trees. They sang songs, made a hullabaloo, often by banging pots and pans, and then in later years by firing guns. And they were rewarded by the orchard's grateful owner with some form of a warm, spiced alcoholic beverage from a communal wassail bowl or cup. Sometimes a topping of apple known as lamb's wool was added. And the intention of wassailing was to ward off bad spirits from the orchards while also pleasing the spirits of the fruit trees, all to ensure a bountiful crop of fruit in the new year. And there are many wassailing songs in Britain. I'm sure most of you have heard this one on the screen. So the two best known songs associated with the tradition today are the Gloucestershire wassail song, which is wassail, wassail all over the town. Our toast is white and our ale is brown. And then the Wassailers Carol, which is on the screen here. Here we come a wassailing among the leaves so green. I'm sure most of us heard that last month at some point. And then the text of the carol employs noun and verb versions of wassail, which is a word derived from the Old Norse ves hail, and the Old English was hail, and that meant to be in good health or to be fortunate. The phrase found first use as a simple greeting, but the Danish-speaking inhabitants of England seem to have turned wassail and the reply drink hail into a drinking formula adopted widely by the indigenous population of England. So much so that the Norman conquerors who arrived in the 11th century regarded the toast as a distinctive of the English natives. And wassail appears in English literature as a salute as early as the 8th century poem Beowulf, which you can see down there on the left. And it references warriors wassail in words of power. And this is the passage from Beowulf. The rider sleepeth, the hero far hidden, no harp resounds. In the courts, no wassail as once was heard. So we know that it was around in the 8th century is the earliest we can find. There's similar usage from an anonymous Anglo-Norman poet who witnessed the Anglo-Saxons toasting each other before the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And that toast went, rejoice and wassail, pass the bottle and drink healthy, drink backwards and drink to me, drink half and drink empty. And then on the top right, you can see this is the Boyo, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, tapestry, but this shows the Battle of Hastings in 1066. That's when The Anglo-Saxons were defeated by William the Conqueror, and that's kind of when we start English royalty as we know it today. All right, and let's go to the next slide. So more history. A story told from Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, which was written in 1135, attempts to explain the origin of the toast. And you can see old Geoffrey there on the left writing down his history. And so keep in mind, Geoffrey is writing the history of the British kings a very long time after the events have happened. So some things might be taken with a grain of salt. The story of toasting wassail began when a girl named Renwine or Rowena presented King Vortigern with a cup of wine and the salute Wes Hail. If you have not heard of King Vortigern, that's fine. He was king of the Britons from 425 Common Era to 450 Common Era. He is often associated with the legend of King Arthur. Supposedly, he was the king that Arthur helped defeated to become in power. So while King Vortigern was being entertained at a royal banquet, Renwine came out of an inner room carrying a goblet full of wine. She walked up to the king and curtsied and said, "Levert King, Wes Hail." When he saw the girl's face, he was immediately struck by her beauty, and he asked his interpreter what she said and how he should reply to her. And so his interpreter said, "She called you Lord King and did you honor by drinking to your health. What you should reply is drink hail." So Vortigern immediately said the words drink hail and ordered Renwine to drink. Then he took the goblet from her hand, kissed her, and drank in his turn. From that day, the tradition has endured in Britain that the one who drinks first at the banquet says Wes Hail, and he or she who drinks next says drink hail. And that painting you see here, right here, that is supposed to be King Vortigern and Rowena together. So moving on. Wassail also denoted the drink used for the toast. Renwine's spiced wine resembled the ancient Roman drink Hippocras, which survived into the early Middle Ages as a libation for the wealthy. Hippocras was a spiced wine. So that's probably what they were drinking in the version. So the first mention of a wassail bowl was actually in the 13th century. And you can see a couple examples I have down here on the screen. Those are both from the Victoria and Albert British Museum in England. The one on the left is wood, and the one on the bottom is, I think it's like it's type of pottery. I didn't see, it's not pewter. Pewter was very popular. So the wassail bowl was a vessel in which the revelers would dip cakes and they would dip bread. This is where we get the term toast. The practice of floating crisps of bread in the wassail bowl gave rise to our use of the word toast as a drinking salutation. And craftsmen fashioned the wassail bowl for materials that could withstand heavy use. And wood was very popular in the earlier days. And then also they used pewter. Sometimes the very, very wealthy had them crafted in precious metals or carved from decorative stone. So I did see examples of wassail bowls that had gold gilt on them and things of that nature. In parts of medieval Britain, a different sort of wassailing emerged. Farmers wassailed their crops and animals to encourage fertility. An observer recorded they go into the ox house to the oxen with the wassail bowl and drink to their health. I think they were just using this as an excuse to drink at this point, but more power. The practice continued into the 18th century when farmers in the west of Britain toasted the good health of apple trees to promote an abundant crop the next year. Some placed cider-soaked bread in the branches to ward off evil spirits. And in other locales, villagers splashed the trees with cider while firing guns or beating pots and pans. And sometimes they sang special songs like this one here. You can see they're firing off their guns. They've all got their cup of wassail. Let every man take off his hat and shout to the old apple tree. Old apple tree, we wassail thee and hoping thou will bear. So that's another example. There were a lot of different wassail toasts that varied greatly from region to region in Britain. And by about 1600, the practice of taking a wassail bowl about the streets had taken root. Instead of consuming the punch-like concoction at home, wassailers went house to house, offering a warm drink, sometimes, mostly expecting payment. A late 17th century commentator wrote, "Wenches buy their wassails at New Year's tide, present you with a cup, and you must drink the slabby stuff. But the meaning is you must give them monies." In some places, girls trimmed the bowl with ribbons and sprigs of rosemary and carried it round the streets while singing carols. And a song of the period that you can see, "Wassail, wassail, out of the milk pail, wassail, wassail, as white as my nail, wassail, wassail, in snow, frost, and hail, wassail, wassail, that much doth avail, wassail, wassail, that will never fail." And you can see on in the picture on the right, you've got this kind of jolly man up here with a big bowl that says peace and goodwill on it. So that is when they made the move to the streets. And it didn't take long for wassailing to merge with other manifestations of holiday misrule that characterized Old English Christmas. It's an inheritance from the ancient Romans, actually, as the Roman winter festival of Saturnalia, which was celebrated at Christmas time. The Anglo-Saxons turned normal social relationships symbolically and temporarily upside down. So that's why it was called the Lord of Misrule. People might cross-dress, they might act the part of the opposite sex. A peasant may be named the Lord of Misrule and could have the Lord of his manor do anything that he wanted. It was called topsy-turvy night in some regions as well. The wealthy were expected to share their bounty with poor villagers and servants. And one manifestation of this, the tipping of servants, was called boxing, after the clay boxes with money slits. And that found its way to colonial America, and we know it today as Boxing Day, which is December 26th. Also the traditional feast day of St. Stephen. And so the concept kind of survives whenever an employer gives a Christmas bonus, or when we tip at the holidays, those who render us services through the year. So there's a lot of charitable giving around the holidays, and that just kind of harkens back to this tradition. It's kind of all coming together. At Christmas time, the poor expected privileges denied to them at other times, including the right to enter the homes of the wealthy who served them the best of their provisions. In exchange, the Lord of the manor had the goodwill of his people for another year. So we're talking about when we had peasant farming, and you would essentially, as a peasant, you wouldn't own your tract of land. The Lord of the manor would, and you had to, plant crops and harvest your crops, and you had to pay him a certain amount a year. So that's what we're talking about. The Lord of the manor wants people to be happy with him and keep working on his land for him, because that makes him rich. So he wanted to keep that tradition going. At these gatherings, the bands of roving wassailers often performed songs for the master while drinking his beer, toasting him, his family, his livestock, and wishing them continued health and wealth. So a couple of the songs, I'm not going to sing them. You don't want me to. But some of the toasts went, "Again we assemble, a merry new year, to which to wish each one of the family here. May they of potatoes and herrings have plenty, with butter and cheese and each other dainty. But not every song expressed goodwill. Some conveyed veiled threats of reprisals for bad treatment, kind of like what we say at Halloween for trick-or-treating. So if you were not treated well by your lord, some people would say, we have come to claim our right, and if you don't open up your door, we'll lay you flat on the floor. No goodwill there, it seems. So Christmas and there we go. Christmas and its associated celebrations were prohibited under Oliver Cromwell's Puritan rule. He's there on the left, so that would have been the end of Elizabeth I's reign and the beginning of James I's reign in England. So he basically outlawed a lot of the celebratory things. It wasn't that Christmas was illegal. Oliver Cromwell basically outlawed like wassailing or drinking or things like that, because there was a lot going on in English politics at that time. And I'll leave it at that because it's a big can of worms. So the 1660 Restoration in England marked a resurgence of festive celebrations, and as a result, many wassail bowls and today's cups that survive date from the final 4 decades of the 17th century, when old world trappings came back into fashion. Now, a form of wassailing attempted to make its way into the new colonies in America. The disorder of such holiday misrule gave concern to the Puritan fathers of New England, who attempted to thwart the transplantation of English Christmas to America. Like I said earlier, the Puritan Parliament outlawed the celebration in England during the 1640s and 1650s. Those laws were similar in America, in New England, but they held that law in New England long after Restoration in 1660. They were Puritan. They did not want to celebrate. They were very austere people. So, but as we move forward and the population of the colonies grow, we have some bad things that happen. So this particular story I found very entertaining, which I'll share with you. Historian Stephen Nissenbaum recounts an incident of Christmas keeping in 17th century Massachusetts of an example of wassailing gone very bad. So on Christmas night of 1679, 4 young men in the village of Salem, yes, that Salem, entered the house of John Rowden, who was known to make pear wine called perry from the trees in his orchard. The men made themselves at home in front of the fire and began to sing. After a couple of songs, they tried to cajole Rowden and his wife into bringing them some of the new wine. But Rowden refused and asked the intruders to leave, to which they responded, "It was Christmas Day at night, and they came here to be merry and to drink perry, which was not to be had anywhere else but here, and perry they would have before they went." When the visitors promised to return later and pay for the drink, Mrs. Rowden said, "We keep no ordinary to call for pots." By ordinary, she meant tavern, and by pots, she meant alcohol. So the 4 men left, but 3 returned 15 minutes later and tried to pass a piece of lead as coin. The Rowdens and their son got the men out the front door, but they wouldn't leave and started taunting the family from the street. John Rowden later testified to the violence that broke out. "They threw stones, bones, and other things at my son in the doorway and against the house. They beat down much of the daubing in several places and continued to throw stones for an hour and a half with little intermission. They also broke down about a pole and a half of fence, being a stone wall and a cellar without the house distance about 4 or 5 rods was broken open through the door, and 5 or 6 pecks of apples were stolen." So that was not a good wassailing experience for the Rowdens. And then Boston, divine Cotton Mather, who you see here in this picture. Cotton Mather was very much responsible for the Salem witch trials. In 1712, he wrote, quote, "The feast of Christ's nativity is spent in reveling, dicing, carding, masking, and in all licentious liberty, by mad mirth, by long eating, by hard drinking, by lewd gaming, by rude reveling, Christmas carol." So he didn't like what they were doing, if you didn't get that from that quote. Christmas caroling was condemned as well, since it occurred in parallel with these acts that he mentioned previously. In Massachusetts, seafaring communities like Nantucket and the town of Marblehead continued to celebrate these notorious celebrations, despite the officials' best efforts to quash Christmas observance throughout the colony. And nearly a century later, in Massachusetts and Deerfield, they're still having problems. Shopkeeper John Burge noted in his account book the arrival of night walkers, or rather blockheads, at his establishment about 2 o'clock in the morning on December 22nd, 1794. Burge refused to open his shop, and the wassailers seem to have gained entry by breaking a window pane and perhaps carried away food and clothing. Burge, the shopkeeper, said, "I cannot see why it was much better than burglary." So Americans did not like wassailing in the very beginning. Practices embodying the idea of wassailing continued into the 19th century, and other wassail-like drinks, especially eggnog, gained popularity. In the 1820s, American novelist Washington Irving did a lot to fix an idealized view of English Christmas, complete with wassailing. So his book here, the cover you see on the left, Old Christmas, he was really idolizing and kind of making things out to be a little bit better than they were for the time period he was writing about. And in England, the works of Charles Dickens portrayed continued gatherings around the wassail bowl. In Victorian times, caroling came to its own, distance from its context of alcohol consumption and rowdiness. Because as we know, Victorian times were a little bit prim and proper. Though rural folks in a few places in Britain keep wassailing practices alive today, it's mostly a matter of self-preservation of an extinct tradition. And as with everything else in our time, the internet serves as a mouthpiece for 21st century revivalists around the world who promote the reinterpretation of wassailing traditions at holiday festivals, or wherever 2 or 3 are gathered around a Christmas punch bowl. And these are pictures taken from modern England. These are all wassail celebrations taken from England that people still do. So now we're gonna make my version of wassail. So I also worked as a bartender for a long time, so I have that experience too. So what I have a hard cider. And if you don't want to make this alcoholic, you could definitely use apple cider or apple juice. We're going to put some spices and stuff into it to kind of freshen it up. So pop this open, and I have a martini shaker. Normally this is a drink that you would serve warm, but I am not near an oven. So we're going to do it cold. And that's the thing with these traditions, is you can make them your own. You can add your own twist on them. So I did about 6 ounces of the hard cider in here. I'm going to add a cinnamon stick. Camera. Down there. I'm going to add some orange peel, and I'm going to add some apples. And to kind of get these all together. Ooh. And also it's Friday, so it's been a good week. All right, so now taking it off. Where's my camera? So that is our wassail drink. As you can see, it's still very pale, but You can't smell, I can. It has the flavor of the apple, orange, and cinnamon in it. Ooh, yum. That's very light, very tasty. So that concludes my wassail talk. I don't know, Emma, if you want to do questions and answers, if anybody wants to throw them in the chat, or we can just open it up for questions. All right. If nobody has any questions, thank you so much for joining us on your lunch break today. We hope that you come to our upcoming events at Powell Gardens. We're going to be doing more of these garden to glass type classes. If you go to our website, we have a lot of things already posted for the spring. But other than that, I am enjoying these comments from everyone. I'm a big history nerd, so I like sharing that. Sharmini asked, what about figgy pudding and wassail? Very good question. And that leads me, so this is the book I kind of used for my research. It's called At Christmas We Feast. It's by Annie Gray. She's a very well-known food historian. So figgy pudding was typically served during Christmas. And so that's kind of why figgy pudding and wassail would be connected together. You know, the 12 days of Christmas was constant partying and eating because they had just gotten done celebrating Advent, where they had to fast for 4 weeks before Christmas. So the 12 days of Christmas was really like an all and out, like just all the food, all the drink, everything you can have. So figgy pudding was part of the menu that they would have probably eaten while drinking wassail as well. All right, well, I am going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you so much, everyone. And then if I believe Emma is going to be sending out the recording as well. And I hope you all have a good weekend and go Chiefs.